Thank you, Dr. Ó'Riordáin, for that presentation. That really is a capstone presentation for the last two sessions that we've had, and for this weekend. And Dr. Ó'Riordáin has concluded by giving us a number of a variation of options that we can pick and mix from. And if you look over to predominantly your right-hand side, towards Conor, our cameraman, you'll see on a trolley, you'll see some sweets and some lots of different types of toys. And if you had a couple of cents in your pocket, you could go there and you could pick and mix. And now that is as Dr. Ó'Riordáin said, and I quote, fundamentally it is your choice, and absolutely it's your choice. And it's your choice to pick and mix. And we have an assembly. We're trying to build a high-performing horse. We don't want to build a camel. We want to design something that's going to work for Dublin. And we're now going to open the floor up to probe some of those questions on the presentation about high-level options for a directly elected mayor and local government structures. So for the next 35 minutes, it's over to you. The floor is open. Questions for Dr. Ó'Riordáin and for the EAG in the top table. So we're going to start with table 11, please. Brian.
Thank you. How are you doing? I'm Brian. You've given us some structural models. Could we also get some funding models? Because that seems to be a major issue for what's going on at the moment, that even if it was a simple thing of just changing the funding structure that we have at the moment, the system we have at the moment would be better. So if we could see some different options for funding as well as structures, please.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So one of our takeaways is to discuss with the EAG and come back with a number of organisational structures, but we'll also include, as you requested, Brian, a funding model. Any response to that, Seán? Any immediate answer?
It's surprising, actually, how common the types of funding that the local authority systems right across the globe have. So, they'll generally raise local property taxes, they'll generally have commercial charges, they'll generally have some levels of subsidy from the National Exchequer, and they'll generally have regulatory fees and other incomes that are created from their day-to-day activities. What is different about Ireland? It's shocking in a way. If we were to look at the amount of resources that local authorities have to put in to having staff filling out individual application forms for individual funds to do individual projects to go back to national government, this is absolutely unique in the OECD. In the OECD, most local authorities, when they're getting grants from Central Exchequer, they are block grants, and there's a degree of independence in how those block grants are spent, having regard to the overall contract between the local authority and the national or regional body. I, off the top of my head, I would think there's not far short of about 500 different funds, ranging from €50 up to €50 million, that local authorities in Ireland have to spend their time filling forms in for in order to deliver the services that are required. So at one level, there's a commonality in terms of the types of monies that are available, but at another level, it's the extent to which local authorities have the independence to determine the priorities for spending, priorities which in Ireland are generally driven by national priorities because of the nature of the individual funds that are being given to them.
Thanks for that, Dr. Ó'Riordáin. Table 3, please.
Thanks. I just wanted to get your opinion on whether or not the regional authorities would be of any benefit to bring back with the directly elected mayor at the head of them, with the existing mayors being deputy mayors. They'd handle the day-to-day running bread and butter issues, ribbon cuttings and all that. And then 3 or 4 big ticket items would be for the mayor, like transportation. And for example, I think it was one of the speakers yesterday said we can provide bus lanes from local authorities, but we can't put buses on them. And that could be statutorily obliged to negotiate with the mayor. So I would just say, you know, I would, how would I put it? I would prefer that there would be small ticket, big ticket items, but small amount of them initially, and get them right, and then from then on add on extra responsibilities. Just see what you thought of that idea.
Yeah, I have to say I think that's a very solid idea by any standards. If a number of important wins on issues like transport could be generated, it would reinforce the role of having the mayor and having that level of democratic accountability at local and regional level that is absent at the moment. People may wonder why the mayor of Bristol, who is actually a very good mayor, by the way, and it's a shame that the system has worked against him. That why is it being abolished in 2024? And as they pointed out, he hadn't had the time to establish because some of these projects are actually very long term, and he hadn't been given the freedom to advance them. So for me, it's critical that there's got to be a fairly solid, tangible demonstration that major projects of some sort or other are brought through as a consequence of the rollout of a democratically elected mayor in Dublin, if only to demonstrate to people that this actually makes sense. And the great thing, if you go to Manchester and you go to Birmingham, just physically visit them, and that's something that I've done many, many times with work and for leisure. You know, when you're in Manchester, how vibrant the city and city region is. You physically see it and feel it. Whereas when you go to Birmingham, it's a totally different experience. It's amazing the difference in the experience. And that reflects the fact that Andy Burnham and his colleagues across the other combined authorities in England and across the various iterations of regional and local democratically elected mayor systems, mainland Europe and elsewhere, you really see the effect of mayors working alongside their partners at local, regional level and indeed at national level, and delivering very, very substantive change on the ground across a range of areas, some of which are bricks and mortar, some of which are less tangible, economic, social and culture.
Do we have any further questions? Again, back to table 3, please.
Malcolm Stewart. A very simple question, but is there a model that... Is there a model that this man can show us which involves very significant devolution of powers from central government to local government, very significant accountability for a DEM to the people, and where is that? Does it exist, and can you just point us to it?
It does exist, and it's the common feature of mayoral government across most parts of the globe. So if you take the examples of the 3 cities that we had yesterday afternoon, what we have seen over the years, particularly for Paris and also Manchester, and increasingly also for Boston, is a gradual migration of responsibilities from the state authorities like Massachusetts State Authority, or in the case of England, Whitehall, and indeed Paris, the central government based in Paris, devolving responsibilities to the city region. So these are now quite a common feature, and if anything, have gained momentum over the last decade. So it's increasingly the case that we see democratically elected mayoral structures in place increasingly across the globe. And while some of them may have started out with essentially initial bully pulpit influence, like the likes of Maragall in Barcelona, they had moved and migrated over time because what state authorities and regional authorities in other countries, and I have to say increasingly is my view here in Ireland, are waking up to, is just how excellent local authorities are in actually getting things done relative to other parts of the public service. It's no coincidence that thinking in cultural terms has shifted so dramatically in the Irish case over the last decade because of the success of local government in advancing culture regeneration, economic renewal, coming out of austerity, demonstrating the fact that if you have people on the ground working closely together and working with other state agencies and state authorities, it is frankly amazing what you can actually achieve. And Ireland is an example of that. But indeed, many other mayoral systems across the globe are equally strong examples. So I'd have no hesitation in recommending any one of the ones I spoke about yesterday, and indeed others, that have been at the heart of economic renewal and regeneration, among other things.
Before we go to table 11, EAG, any comments?
Just maybe a quick comment, if you don't mind, Chairman. I think we had some examples internationally yesterday. Sean has mentioned that there are a lot of models out there, and I would say there are and there aren't. There are not hundreds of models either. They're nearly all variations of a theme. So I think even in the 4 that kind of Sean has mentioned there in the pick and mix slide, they cover a lot, and obviously you have freedom to mix and match, go in different directions as well. But I think don't be worried that you're missing some great global example. Most things are covered within these kind of 4 pieces, and I think we're heading into more difficult territory. This is kind of where you earn your meals. But you're well able to do that. And what today is, when you get into your roundtables, is an initial dipping of your toes into the water. No one is expecting outcomes today. It's just to try and put some frame on what we're doing, and Sean has helped us with that very much, I think.
So on to table 11, then 8.
Francis, I'm just wondering if it would be possible for the Assembly that if we picked an area for the Mayor to begin with, for example, transport, if it would be possible for us to stipulate that the functions and budget and responsibility would gradually pass to the Mayor's office. So, for example, the budget 25% the first 2 years, then 50%, then 75%. I mean, it doesn't have to be exact, but would that be workable?
I might just ask, I'll make a comment before bringing Sean in. You can propose what you'd like once there's a consensus around it. That's the first thing I'd say. Sean?
Yeah, exactly, Jim. I think there might even be an expectation that that's what you would do from the point of view of those that are watching the Assembly and its work. And I think what you're suggesting, Francis, is no more than the earlier suggestion, is common sense. So I would encourage you. Let me just, I've been involved in local government reform, particularly in Ireland, for going on over 30 years now at this stage. And one particular reform that occurred as part of the 2014 reforms was to take what was an already existing local service operating alongside the local authorities and embed it back into local government, where it probably should have been from the very beginning. And I think it involved about 70 staff transferring. But the effort it took across 3 government departments, the local government system, the City and County Management Association, the trade unions, to make that happen. Now, it did happen eventually, and it's been hugely successful, by the way. And everybody's saying, why didn't we do it before this? But it took about 3 years for that to happen. And that's just one specific area. These things can be very difficult to advance because people are worried, people have concerns, worried about their positions, and so on. So I think taking something really, really tangible and creating that idea of gradually beginning to transfer responsibility across to the Mayor's office is a very, very solid idea.
Professor Breen?
Yeah, I think Sean is spot on. I think it's a very good idea to have sort of a schedule of powers and finances to be transferred. And it also gives you the option that you actually have something in writing. This is what we expect by 2026, 28, 30, 32, 34. And that it's a roadmap for change. And I think that would be a very useful way to think about it, that it's graduated, it's structured. You have an it can be reviewed on an ongoing basis, but that actually you have actually laid down what you want to see over a very particular period, and the expectation then is that's met by government departments.
I also think that might make for a case study, that transport as a case study of what that might look like for one of the sessions, even for 15 minutes. We're on to table number 8, then 9.
Hello, my name is Shane. Just a question on the Assembly. We're hearing a lot about the Regional Assembly. What other functions besides scrutiny and holding the Mayor to account could be incorporated there? Obviously, it's up to us to decide what it is, but it'd be good to hear about what other functions such an Assembly might have aside from scrutiny of the Mayor.
Sean, could you answer that first?
I think the Assembly gives you the opportunity, and again, this is something been used by other mayoral systems, to think strategically and critically beyond the horizon. One of the real difficulties confronting political leaderships across the globe, and equally so here in Ireland, and indeed their supporting administrative and professional regimes, is they're so caught up in the day-to-day and dealing with, things that weren't even happening 2 months ago in the case of Ukraine, for example, that are now very much at the heart of what government across the globe is trying to cope with. So the opportunity to think beyond the box, using the wealth of experience from among such an assembly, from the citizens of the area, going back to the example from Paris, and using that to look forward and think about where we're going as a city region over 10, 15, 100 years would be, for me, a really important point, because it's something we haven't been particularly good at in Ireland, and we suffer the consequences, I think, in a lot of the legacies and gaps that we have in meeting people's needs, particularly people-centred service needs, because we're trying to deal with the immediate rather than the strategically important. And housing is a classic example of that. We knew 25 years ago we were going to have major housing problems in this era, because we were having major problems with providing classrooms for our primary children 25 years ago, and nobody had the capacity to think forward. What does that mean for us in 25 years' time, and how do we create investment programs to meet those needs as they're going to arise? So I think for me, Shane, that would be a really important piece of work to be done, above and beyond the scrutiny that you would expect of an assembly of that type.
Thanks, Dr. O'Riordáin. Thinking strategically is a really key part, and a very well met point. EAG, any further comments on what an assembly could do?
Not specifically, other than the idea that obviously some of the assembly members could form this type of cabinet and have a specific functional remit themselves. So I think that could be an option, and it was something that was mentioned yesterday.
Thank you. 8 minutes to go. Table 9.
Hi. Yeah. I think I just comment and a question, because we're talking on models, and obviously the better the model, the better that will be. I think Andy Burnham said yesterday about I think he was referencing the point about better to have a good plan today than a perfect plan tomorrow. But obviously we try to do the best we can and put the best model in place. But just to quote a couple of proverbs, one is that if people are prosperous, even a leaderless state can be managed. And leaders of a state should make sure all their citizens dine first and then they dine on the leftovers. So I'm just wondering that, a key effort of any mayor should really be economic development, because the more you develop economically, the more prosperous people become, the more you deal with issues like antisocial behavior and all those kind of things. So that's more or less just a comment. My question is directly to you, Jim. You've used the word consensus about, I think, 3 times this morning in answers to different questions. What constitutes consensus? Are we talking simple majority? Are we talking, 75%, 2/3, 100%? Just curious what you meant by consensus.
My understanding it's a simple majority, but I will defer to the Secretary General to just to back that up or to have a different perspective.
Thanks for that, Chairman. Yeah, I get all the easy ones. Yeah, I mean, a simple majority is normally enough for a recommendation. The only thing I would say, though, I mean, if not unlike something like the Brexit thing where it's 51-49, I think we would have to reflect that in the report, and government might take that into account as well, just the size of it. So the results of the ballots, every individual ballot on every individual question will be published and made available under our transparency rules, so people can interpret the weight of the recommendation themselves by the size of the majority.
And finally, just to put a capstone on that, again, I refer to the terms of reference. The terms of reference of the Dublin City Assembly are as follows, and I quote, third last bullet, determine all issues by a majority of the votes of members present and voting, other than the chairperson who will have the casting vote in the case of an equality of votes. End of quote. Does that clarify it, Paul?
You've actually referenced the terms of reference twice in questions I've asked, and it just tells me that I need to read the terms of reference a little bit more.
No,
in fact, I should learn them off by heart.
That's all. Thanks, Paul. And Breed.
Just a quick point in response to your suggestion about economic development. I'm going to say it's quite a timely one because, as we said in the first gathering, it's only since 2014 that local authorities have had responsibility for economic development. So they're finding their way and working out the best strategies. So it's a good time to think of maybe linking, or a possibility of linking it in.
Before we go back to table 9 for a question, just to finish that off, Paul, we take it as a compliment that you're asking us questions to clarify. We want to create that safe space where you can put your hand up, and it's a really, really important question you asked, so thanks for asking it. On to John,
Can I
please.
just
table 9.
Make a point there, Jim, as well, just on economic development. In a previous role, I was a corporate advisor for a number of foreign direct investment sector companies based in the States and in Japan. And the number of times I had to explain to senior potential investors who might be looking at Ireland and looking at other areas that they might be looking to invest in before they go to the IDAs of the world, because these companies don't just roll up to the IDA and say, hey, we have $1 billion to spend. They do their homework before they meet up with the likes of the IDA, excellent as they are in their job. But the number of times I've had to explain to senior company officials in various companies that are looking at Ireland as a potential investment point that it's more important for them at the moment to meet the chief executive of the local authority than the mayor is extraordinary. It's almost a common theme anytime I'm brought in by such companies, because the expectation, because it happens in their own countries or in the countries they've already invested in, is that they will be dealing with the mayor's office. And it's almost why are we meeting a mere official? We need to be meeting the senior political leader here. And no, it doesn't work like that in Ireland. So just, as I say, a little bit of a story behind the different international interpretations of who it is you should deal with when it comes to investing economically in a country like Ireland.
We'll also put on Paul on the website or the library for the Assembly members. There's a report strategic report published by the Dublin Chamber of Commerce, who advocating the position that you mentioned about the economic benefit of having a directly elected mayor. So it's a point that Dr. Ó'Riordáin just made there. So thank you. Now back to table 9 with John, with 3 minutes to go.
Thanks, Sean, for the presentation. Yeah, just a quick question and a comment. Just the regional assembly, would you envisage that being a directly elected regional assembly or one appointed from councillors? I know the Eastern Midlands Regional Assembly at the moment isn't, obviously it's purely consultative, but it isn't directly elected. And secondly, just on the fourth point about the idea of abolishing the 4 local authorities and having networked metropolitan councils, I think you mentioned the Howth Malahide Area Committee. I suppose there's a number of area committees that wouldn't necessarily lend themselves to becoming town councils or metropolitan councils. And I'll just give the example of one also fairly close to us in Fingal, which is there's an area committee that takes in most of North Dublin, so Swords, Balbriggan, Lusk, Rush and Skerries, and obviously Swords and Lusk or Swords and Skerries have quite different interests. Even Dublin 15, there's significant differences, say, between Blanchetown or Ongar, which is on the Meath boundary. So I suppose just to take that into account, that if something like that was being done, area committee areas would probably have to be reconstructed. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I was just instancing it as an example that in fact there is something there to start working with, but it has to have a resonance in terms of local identity and the connection between the elected body and the local community. So these are critical aspects, but it is interesting nonetheless that the local authorities are in Dublin and indeed generally across the country with municipal districts, as Breed was talking about earlier, are progressively building up a relationship that is very, very locally based and is seeing the migration of services at a very, very local level in a way that mightn't necessarily have been envisaged in the short term when the 2014 reforms were being proposed. On the question of directly elected assembly members, I'm quite open. My own personal preference, for what it's worth, is that these are democratic bodies and therefore would probably ideally be elected, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be. The fact that people can be nominated from the local structures in Paris and in Manchester suggests that there is that democratic platform anyway, in the absence of a direct election into the regional structure. So I would think, again, for yourselves to reflect on that and to come back with what you think is the best option.
Well, that concludes the session. Dr. Seán Ó'Riordáin, thank you so much for taking time out of your weekend to be with us yesterday and again this morning on a Sunday morning. Could you please, everyone, express your gratitude to Dr. Seán Ó'Riordáin.